What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. That's Dr. Jane Goodall. On behalf of Elders Action Network, a national organization of elders dedicated to creating a better world for all future generations, I thank you for your interest, your time, and your action to take the pledge to electrify everything. We're here today to have a serious conversation about the significant difference you can make by electrifying everything, your home and your ride. My name is Robert Whitehair, and I'm going to admit somebody. And of Elders Action Network, and along with Brian Stewart of Electrify Now, we're here to help you implement your pledge to electrify everything. Electrify everything is an important, this can work. Here we go, sorry guys. Electrify everything is an important elective in the Take the Pledge campaign. By deciding and then taking every opportunity to electrify everything, your home, your ride, you reduce and eventually eliminate fossil fuels in your daily lives, up to 20 tons of greenhouse gases per home per year. Pam, would you like to say something about the Take the Pledge campaign? She's not on yet. This is not a, I'll go on. This
Pam,
is
Pam, you're muted. You're muted, Pam.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, sorry.
Thank you, Brian.
So I'm just curious, how many on the call have taken the pledge already? Everybody, anybody? Okay, a few of you, okay, and several of you not. So this webinar is part of the Take the Pledge campaign, which is about reducing our consumerism. It's on the Elders Action Network. It's all month long, the month of May, and you can join anytime and still get all the information. So it's getting great reviews, and so we really recommend that you at least look at it and give it a try. Thank you. I don't want to take too much of your time.
Thank you, Pam. I know you've been working so hard on the overall Take the Pledge campaign. We thank you so much for all you've done. And it's a great opportunity to take the pledge, not only to electrify everything, but take a look at all the things we do in our consumer way of life. For us, the electrification, this is not a pledge to immediately rip out all your fossil fuel equipment and appliances and sell your gasoline-powered car. Well, if you want to, we could sure help you do that. It is, however, about direct personal action every chance you get that you can take to tackle the climate crisis head on. It's something that you can do personally with a direct impact. It is about a regenerative approach, an inclusive and effective strategy of collaboration with others in your community. And we're going to talk a little bit later about collaboration. We want your support. You know, that basically we would like you to help us, help you, and help us along with what we're trying to do in each community. We have a tremendous opportunity to take the pledge for personal action, which is the subject of today's presentation, and to build action confidence so that you can fulfill your pledge. With what you learned today and with the follow-up support we are offering, we hope to put all of you well on your way to taking the pledge of electrifying everything. I'm pleased to say that my wife and I have completely electrified our home in San Mateo, California. In May of last year, I took my handy dandy California earthquake wrench and shut off the so-called natural gas to our home permanently. We hope to be able to help you do the same. This has been a community effort in Elders Action Network with leadership from Pam, but also I want to point out Libby Traubman, Catherine Scrabble, Melissa Ribner, and I know I forgot somebody, but it's been a group effort, a bunch of really good people working really hard. Just a little context, by our society-wide suicidal use of fossil fuels, we mutually created this climate crisis and we mutually can change it. But because of our discomfort, should we continue to pretend there is no problem? Well, what we'd rather do is Electrify Now, and Brian Stewart is going to talk about that, all the things that we can all do and answer a lot of questions. In the typical American home, around 2,000 square feet, what we do to heat, cool, cook, light, and get to and from our homes creates about 18 tons of CO2 per year. Gas and or oil water heater generates 4 to 10 tons of CO2 per year. I bring up the water heater because that's likely to be the first thing that fails. And we're going to talk about a strategy of how you can replace it. But we're kind of lucky in a way because appliances fail. By the time I grew up on a farm, through my entire working career as a facilities director, one thing was very clear. Equipment and building appliances will fail. For example, gas and oil water heaters mostly have a lifespan of around 12 years or so, 12 to 15. So every year, about 7% of all water heaters are failing. Every failure is an opportunity to replace something causing damage to the environment. Statistically, at least 1 or 2 appliances will fail in your home in the next few years. And homeowners who don't have enough knowledge or don't have the understanding of how to replace all those will unfortunately decide on something that they're stuck with, existing gas or oil water heater with another gas or oil water heater for up to 15 years. Anything not electric will become obsolete very quickly, a stranded asset. As a grandparent wanting safe, livable futures for my great-great-grandchildren, all the people across the country recognizing and showing the benefits of electrification is something I'm very keen on doing. I spend most of my time on this. It demonstrates how doable and affordable building electrification can become. A lot of you have probably already replaced a lot of your light bulbs in your home, and coupled with Electrify Everything is a good recipe for successful outcome. Barry and I went through our house a few years ago and found that we had 93 light bulbs, the ceiling lights, fans, lamps, the refrigerator, outdoor security lights, and even the stove. We replaced every single one of the fluorescent, compact fluorescent, and incandescent bulbs with LED. That gave us a load reduction of a surprising 5,000 watts of electricity, enough to power a refrigerator, washing machine, microwave, toaster, and even a small air conditioning unit. Why are we doing this? Quite simply, there's an existential threat to continued life of the planet, its people, and its ecosystem. We've broken heat records, wildfire records, rainfall records, seen epic flooding and extreme weather that costs billions of dollars in distress. The most recent finding from the IPCC is that carbon emissions must start a downward slope immediately. Every addition of a gas-fired piece of equipment, new or replacement, is a step in the wrong direction. So by taking the pledge to electrify everything, you're putting us well on the way of stopping the climate crisis in its tracks. When Terry and I first got involved with environmental issues, this was our idea where the problem lay: fossil fuel plants. The upper left-hand corner is a gas power plant, a gas plant producing electricity. One on the far right is one in Russia that creates Eastern Europe rather, that creates electricity. One on the lower left is coal, and one on the far right on the bottom is a petrochemical plant in Russia. As bad as these are, we have an immediate opportunity to do something in our own home because we have a little fossil fuel plant in our home. 20% of US greenhouse gas emissions come from that little fossil fuel plant called your home. You can see the furnace in the attic. You can see the fireplace. You can see on the lower left and the basement, you can see the gas water heater, maybe another gas furnace and a gas dryer. All of those are opportunities for you to have a direct personal impact on the climate crisis by eliminating those. And I would add the other thing is that the 2020 UCLA study found children growing up in a home with a stove and other gas appliances have a 42% more likely chance of developing asthma. What can the individual do? We're going to talk about that now. And the other thing is that natural gas doesn't make sense either as continued use or to replace oil. In our area, we're seeing a lot of TV ads for so-called clean fossil fuels. But methane, also known as natural gas, not only creates CO2, leaks occur at places all along this pressurized system. at the wellhead and transmission and distribution lines compressors. That's because the gas is pumped at 1,400 pounds per square inch. So methane is not the answer. This is my favorite slide because these are slides of all over America where people are working to electrify everything. The upper left-hand corner is Irvine, California, where a group of citizens were upset that the council wasn't fulfilling their promise. So what they did, they elected 3 new city council members. In the middle is Howard County, Maryland. You see Elder Climate Action that we're doing things. The people standing in front of a bus are from Florida, where they are pushing hard to get electric vehicles in national parks. In the lower right-hand corner is Corvallis, Oregon, which Brian is involved with, and where there will be a ballot initiative to keep natural gas. We can talk about that later. And then you see it in the lower upper and the far left corner middle is our organization, my organization, San Mateo Climate Action Team. Good things are happening all over the country. How am I doing on time, Brian? Oops, too fast. Good things are happening all over the country. These dots are these stars are places where things are happening in every part of the United States right now. High quality electric options are available for every home appliance. Heat pump water heater, left-hand corner top, an induction stove, a heat pump for heating and cooling in the bottom, and of course a gas dryer, electric dryer. And here's some real examples. This is my home. That's the heat pump water heater in our garage. The heat pump for space heating and cooling up in the right corner, our induction stove, and what I like to call is my solar clothes dryer in the bottom. So I'm going to stop there. Well, first, what we're going to talk about today is Take the Pledge, Knowledge and Action. We do offer to make presentations to local groups anywhere in the country. We will help you form a local group. We've done it here very successfully. Brian has done it very successfully. We can help you find resources for your group, and we will help you complete the pledge to electrify everything. And now I'm going to introduce Brian Stewart of Electrify Now. We are very fortunate to have Brian. Brian has been working in the area of sustainability and created the organization Electrify Now. He's going to talk about the nitty-gritty, and we're going to leave as much time as we want for answering questions. So Brian, thank you for being here today, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you. Okay, well, thanks, Bob, and thanks everyone for being here today. My background is I was a corporate sustainability officer at Nike for many years. Before I retired, I was vice president of sustainable innovation there. I'd been there for 30 years doing many different things. But when I retired, I was really kind of frustrated that there wasn't better information available to everyday people like you and I about all the amazing things that are possible for us to do in our own lives, not only to combat, climate change and reduce our own personal emissions, but help be part of this really big change that's happening in our energy systems. And that's why we got excited about this. And my wife and I started Electrify Now almost 5 years ago now. And at the time, there wasn't much dialogue about this. So we felt like it was really important. And now you're starting to hear these things more, which is great, but it's still important that people like you and I help to accelerate this change that's happening in our systems, which we'll talk about. I like to start pretty high level because even when I was a corporate officer in sustainability, I wouldn't have been able to explain this as simply as this slide here in terms of where carbon emissions come from. But it's pretty obvious once you do the poking around, you find that over 80% of our carbon emissions come from burning fossil fuels for energy, and specifically for electricity, for the transportation that we need, and for heating our homes and buildings, and for industry. And of course, there's emissions from other places like agriculture and industrial processes. But if that was all we were faced with, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It's really about energy. And the same is true in our household, at the household level. The emissions that we're responsible for as individuals, it's very similar. It's about 60% of our personal emissions come from burning fossil fuels for energy. Those same three things: electricity, transportation, and heat. Of course, there's emissions associated with the products we buy and the food that we consume. And it's good to be thinking about that and buying locally produced agricultural products, organically produced products, regenerative agriculture if possible, if it's available in your area. And of course, we should be buying fewer things. But even if we do those things, we can chip away at those two boxes on the right. But this big black box from energy, it's possible to eliminate completely all the emissions from the energy we consume in our lives. We've done it in our home. Bob's done it in his home. We've helped people all over the country to do this. And that's really what we're talking about today. As Bob mentioned, it's not something you snap your fingers and do. It takes a while typically, but it's important to know what's available so that when the option presents itself, one of your appliances fails, for example, or you just had it and you want to take action, you know what to do. So I think one of the things that's really important to kind of assimilate is this idea that we have to stop burning fossil fuels. It used to be that we talked a lot about burning fewer, using less energy, which is always a good thing. But at this point, it's not about using less energy so much. It's about eliminating the natural gas, coal, and diesel as sources of energy. We still need these energy for these things, but we don't need to get it from fossil fuels, which is what we'll talk about. And as Bob mentioned, we like to single out natural gas a lot because it has this reputation as being clean and green, but as Bob mentioned, it's not. It's similar or worse in terms of its impacts to coal, largely because there's so much of this leakage that Bob was mentioning in our system, which sort of makes sense if you think about it. If you've got literally thousands and thousands of miles of pipe with high pressure gas in it, it's pretty common sense that it's going to leak, and it does. So renewable natural gas is something you might hear about too. That's mostly a marketing ploy from the gas companies, although there's some modest uses for renewable gas. It's not going to let us keep burning gas in our homes the way we have been. So the bad news, if you want to think of it that way, is that we have to stop burning these fuels that's really helped us to build the societies that we have today. But the good news is that we don't need those fuels any longer. There's new ways to get energy that are actually cheaper than fossil fuels and way, way better for the environment, for our air, et cetera. This graph here shows the cost of energy for various things. You can see the two white lines are wind and solar. And from 2009 on the left here to 2021 on the right, you can see how the prices per megawatt hour have just plummeted, and they're projected to go even lower. But already they're the cheapest way to get energy, cheaper than coal, cheaper than gas, et cetera. So that's why the new generation in this country is almost exclusively wind and solar, because it's so much cheaper, and it's even starting to replace some of the generation from other sources. The other thing that's really exciting, and Bob mentioned this with incandescent versus LED bulbs, is that electric appliances are just dramatically, all of them, anything that uses electricity now uses much less than it did a few years ago. This is a kind of graph that shows a comparison of a few things that we're familiar with. Gas furnaces, I like to show this not because it's very unimpressive. In 30 years, from 1990 on the left to 2023, gas furnace standards have improved 2%. It means that the minimum efficiency that's required for a gas furnace is 2% better today than it was 30 years ago. Essentially no change. And that's because the gas industry has been fighting standards so vociferously, and also the technology itself is limited in terms of how much more efficient even can be. But compare this to heat pumps, where the minimum standard over that time has improved 30%. Air conditioners, 40% better than they were. Dishwashers use 100% less energy now than they did 30 years ago. Refrigerators, 155%. A heat pump water heater, which we'll be talking about, is nearly 3 times as energy efficient as the best available electric water heater from 1990. And LED light bulbs are kind of the poster child for this, because they're 5 times more energy efficient than incandescent bulbs. So electric appliances are just getting better and better all the time, and there's still room for improvement, but they're so much more efficient. And as a result, if you look at how much electricity we use in this country, which is the yellow line there, again, this is from 2000 to 2020, you can see we are using slightly more electricity today than we were 20 years ago, even though we have more people living in this country. And it's largely, the reason it's flat is because of those efficiency things that we just mentioned, that we're getting as much benefit or more benefit than we ever did, but we're actually using less energy to do it. And so that's kept our energy use flat. But the white line is the really exciting thing. This is the emissions from the electric grid in this country. And you can see that they've been going down and down and down as we're bringing more renewables online, as we retire coal plants, et cetera. And it's, again, this is happening faster and faster as more states get clean energy programs, et cetera. And literally every time someone puts solar panels on their roof, it helps to make that white line go down further. So with all those things, really clean, efficient electric devices, low cost renewable energy, a grid that gets cleaner all the time. This is why you hear these words, electrify everything, because it's the easiest way that we're going to get to what we want, which is a sustainable future with plenty of power for all the things that we need, but having those come in a way that doesn't endanger our lives, our health, and our future generations. So that's why you hear these words, electrify everything, more and more. And we can use that energy for electricity, for transportation, and for heat, which is what we'll be talking about. And one of the nice things, although we've been kind of talking about this from the lens of carbon emissions, when we do this, we get all these almost unbelievable side benefits, which are savings on energy. It'll cost less to do exactly what we want to do. We'll have cleaner air. Think about it for a minute. Where do air pollution come from? It comes from burning stuff primarily, and that's fossil fuels. There's an amazing amount of clean water that's used to process fossil fuels, somewhere between 10 and 40%, depending on where you live, of the available fresh water is used for processing fossil fuels. All that could be available for much more important things like drinking, for example. And of course, this transition that we're talking about has lots of benefits to the economy. We're already seeing that with the Inflation Reduction Act, where there's new jobs, new manufacturing going in at a really unprecedented rate as a result of that legislation. So as Bob mentioned before, these are the 4 biggest sources of energy use and carbon emissions in your life: the electricity you consume, your car, your gas furnace, and your water heater. And if you're really diligent, I remember my mother telling me to turn off the lights when we leave the room. You might reduce these numbers through efficiency strategies by 20% or so if you're really diligent. But if you look at what's possible when we combine renewable energy and electrification, it's dramatic. Now we get all that electricity that we want and we need, and it's creating 0 tons of carbon emissions. We drive our cars around whenever we need to, wherever we need to go, for 0 tons of carbon emissions. We heat our homes with heat pumps for 0, and we heat our water also for 0. So now, rather than a home that creates 20 to 30 tons per year, depending on how large it is and how many people live there, it could be producing 0 tons of carbon emissions. It's just as comfortable, in fact, more comfortable, most likely, a safer place to live. And we would be paying much less money for all the energy that we consume. So that's why it's so easy to be excited about this and feel it's an optimistic story that needs to be told. And it needs people like you and all of us to understand this, embrace it, incorporate it in our lives where we can, and tell our friends and family about this good news, because this is going to make all our lives better. We try to make it as simple as possible for people to do these things because it can feel daunting. We talk about it in these terms of cleaning up your electric supply, electrifying your home, which is probably the most complex, and we'll spend the most time on that. And then, of course, electrifying your transportation. And I like to remind people that, those of us who have means, it's one thing for us to think about, buying a new appliance, but there are many people who are just barely paying their energy bills to begin with, and for whom those energy bills are a much higher portion of their overall income. So we need to have philanthropy and policy that helps electrify everyone, not just those who can afford it. Okay, I want to start with one of the easiest and simplest things to do. Hopefully some of you have already done this in your lives, but you can get clean energy into your home today. It doesn't cost a lot more. In fact, sometimes it's actually cheaper. There's 3 main ways to do it. Almost all utility companies in the United States offer some sort of green power plan where they get their electricity from renewable sources, sometimes RECs and other products. You don't need to know the mechanics of it. The important thing is if this is available from your utility, please sign up for this. Usually it will cost a few extra dollars per month, but it's absolutely worth it. You're supporting the clean energy industry when you do that. For many of us, putting rooftop solar on our homes makes a lot of sense, particularly if we have roof that gets a lot of sun, and if it's a roof we own, of course, that makes it possible. And if we're not planning to move anytime soon, rooftop solar is a really good deal. It's fantastic in terms of the economics, but also you're adding new clean energy generation, which again is cleaning up the grid. In some states, on nearly 22 now, although it's a little bit different in each state in terms of how you access this, you can get what's called community solar, which is where you're subscribing through your utility to a solar farm in your area. And here in Oregon, it's a great program. In many states, it's like this, where you actually get discounts on your energy consumption prices. So you actually can save money instead of spending more. But again, when you support these local farms, these community solar farms, you're supporting new clean energy generation, helping to clean up our grid. So all of these have the same net effect, that you avoid 3 to 5 tons and you're helping to finance clean energy generation. But the really important thing about this, the reason why it's the first thing we talk about, is because now everything you plug into, you plug in the wall, anything you power with that clean electricity in your home is producing 0 emissions, which is a foundation for all the actions that we take afterwards. This is probably the most complicated one, but in some ways it's the one that it's really most important to understand. And that's about electrifying your home. And as Bob mentioned, we've already talked about, these are the 2 big ones the monsters in your basement, so to speak, your gas furnace and your gas water heater. If you have gas, these are the largest sources of carbon emissions from your home. But anything that burns fossil fuels in your home should be considered as a candidate for replacement, and there are good electric options for all of them. The kind of technology that's really changed the game here is called heat pumps. And this is the reason why suddenly electric versions of heating and cooling are so much more attractive than they were years ago. And it's because of these incredibly efficient devices called heat pumps. We've had them in our lives since we were children. Refrigerators are heat pumps, an air conditioner is a heat pump. It basically works by moving heat from one place to another. It's super efficient. Your refrigerator is basically warming your kitchen slightly as it moves the warm air out of the inside of the refrigerator into your kitchen. You probably felt that if you put your hand behind your refrigerator. That's the movement of the heat from inside to outside. And these are incredibly efficient. A couple of summers ago, before we turned our air conditioning on, we had the heat dome here in our kitchen was nearly 100 degrees, but our refrigerator was still making ice. And that's because these heat pumps can deal with these huge temperature differences. You can cool a space even when it's hot outside. You can heat a space even when it's cool outside with these incredibly efficient devices. I like to start with water heaters because they're kind of the simplest in some ways. They're kind of like the reverse of your refrigerator. So this device looks just like a regular water heater for the most part. It sits in your basement or in your garage. Those are 2 good places for a utility room. And just like your refrigerator, it's harvesting energy in a sense from the air that's around it. So it'll cool the room that it's in slightly in order to concentrate the heat into what's called the refrigerant that goes around the water tank and heats up the water in the tank. So we have ours in our basement. You hardly notice the temperature difference. It might be 1 or 2 degrees cooler down there than it otherwise would be. It's also dehumidifies the basement, which is really nice. If you have humidity issues, these things are fantastic that way because they dehumidify. But one of the reasons why there's 2 reasons why they're super exciting. I've told you about the technology, but check out the costs to operate them. So for an electric storage, typically, these are national average prices here that I'm showing. It's going to cost you over $500 a year to heat your water, typically for electric storage, an old electric resistance one. That's why gas storage water heaters have been attractive, because they're quite a bit cheaper to operate than electric resistance. And then gas tankless ones are slightly more efficient than that. But check out the heat pump over here, $130 versus over $300 for the gas models and over $500 for the electric storage. It's dramatically cheaper to operate because it's so efficient. And of course, that translates into fewer carbon emissions. You know, there's nothing that can compete with this from a carbon standpoint. And as we've already discussed, if you've got clean energy in your home, it wouldn't even be 0.6 tons, it would be 0. But first, for a national average, regular old electricity right from the wall today, without doing anything that we talked about in step 1, it would still be dramatically fewer emissions. So this is why this technology is being incentivized all over the place. A lot of local utilities have great programs to make it cheaper for you to do this. But a lot of plumbers are still kind of like, I don't know, some of them don't want to deal with this. So sometimes you have to call around to find someone who will do it. But if you at first get a no, keep calling, because there will be someone in your area who understands that this is the future. For space heating, it's a similar story. You have this, the same technology, heat pumps, that come in 2 kind of basic varieties. There's the ducted ones that blow air through your ducts in your floor. So if you've got a gas furnace, for example, you would get a ducted heat pump, which would have this external unit that looks just like an air conditioner outside your house, which is, again, collecting the heat from outside and converting that to the refrigerant and pumping it into your home, and then the air is blown through your ducts. You can have a ductless version of that. These are often called mini splits, where you have the same external unit, but now instead of blowing air through ducts, you have one of these called a mini split unit or a high wall unit that's usually located high on the wall in one of your rooms. That's what we have in the space where I'm here. We have one mini split that's heating basically the whole house, because we have a relatively small house here. These things are incredibly efficient. All the major manufacturers are making them. So anyone who makes gas furnaces, for the most part, also makes these things. They've been doing it for years in Japan and places like that. That's all they have. So they've been really perfected this technology. Some of the leaders are Mitsubishi and Daikin. The Japanese brands tend to be a little bit ahead of the curve on this. And that's why they have relationships with American brands like Trane and Goodman, et cetera. There's often these collaborative arrangements between the Japanese companies and the American companies to bring this best technology over. So you can see these really efficient heat pumps now available here in the United States that weren't maybe 10 years ago. But this is why this is so exciting, again, is because of these costs here. Oil furnaces, there are a lot of them still in the East Coast, and here even on the West Coast, you see them. A lot of older homes have them. They're incredibly expensive in terms of heat. You can be over $2,000 a year. An electric baseboard is also very common in different parts of the country, and those are also quite expensive. And again, this is partly why gas has become popular, is because it's quite a bit cheaper than those first 2 older technologies that I mentioned. But now with these heat pumps, they're so incredibly efficient, they tend to be cheaper than a gas furnace, even a really good gas furnace. It's going to be somewhat cheaper. So you can see from an economic standpoint, there's good reasons to do this. And again, from a carbon standpoint, the black bars here, you can see the heat pump produces far fewer emissions, even just with regular electricity. And then again, that can go to 0, whereas gas furnace can never go to 0, no matter how efficient it is. All right. I'm sure a lot of you have been hearing the news about methane being dangerous and about gas stoves in particular. It's been all over the news, which I'm happy about, because it helps us to be more aware of something that has been insidiously kind of harming our health in the background. And as Bob mentioned, there's studies that say that, as much as 42% higher risk for asthma in children in many parts of the country where gas is prevalent. This is the leading cause of asthma. And I really feel bad about having raised our children with gas in our homes. Fortunately, none of them have had these problems that we're aware of, but it's very common. And these stoves it sort of makes sense when you think about it. You're burning something really toxic inside your kitchen. You probably wouldn't start a fire in your house without really good ventilation. And even if you did have really good ventilation, you probably would understand that the ventilation isn't going to get all of that out unless you open all the windows and doors. And that's the case with our stoves. Even a good hood cannot get rid of all the toxic byproducts of combustion. And so that's the bad news. But the good news is that we have an even better solution. It's not just like somewhat better or some kind of compromise. It works better than the gas stove. That's called an induction stove. And it has these insane benefits besides being, clean and not creating these byproducts of combustion in our homes. But they're faster to cook, faster to boil water, for example, faster to heat anything. There's more of the energy goes into your food, so your kitchen doesn't get as hot. They're way easier to clean. I mean, just think about this. Imagine in our house, I remember making pancakes for the whole family, and undoubtedly some of it would end up down in the burner, and that would take me like a half an hour to clean. After breakfast was done with induction range, you just wipe it off with a rag because it's a glass surface you're cleaning. It's safer because the glass surface doesn't get hot. And there's none of these emissions that we were talking about that make cooking inside dangerous. Here's just one stat on, this is a study that was done comparing electric resistance, natural gas, and electric induction. In this case, they were boiling 8 quarts of water, and you can see that the induction stove could boil that water in half the time that even a really big, beefy gas burner. So these things are just better, and besides being safer. One of the things that I think is really fun to know is that you can try this in your own home without replacing your stove if you've got a gas stove, or maybe you've got an old electric stove and you want to just see what all the fuss is about induction. Try buying one of these little portable countertop units. They're anywhere from $60 to $100. It's a single hob, a single burner, but you can try it, cook a meal on it, see what we're talking about in terms of how quick and easy it is to use, how easy it is to clean, and without it being an expensive cash outlay, and really understand why people are so excited about this. One thing to point out, that all these devices that we're talking about, they're not fringe products from brands that you've never heard of. All the major manufacturers that make furnaces, water heaters, stoves, any appliance at all, they're all switching in their R&D and ramping up their focus on these technologies, exact technologies that we're talking about, because they see that they're the future. I just had a long conversation with Carrier brand, one of the major manufacturers of heat pumps and furnaces, and I can tell you all the energy within the company is focused on heat pumps and making better and better heat pumps. They're not spending a lot of time thinking about how to make better gas furnaces, because they realize that those things, the days are numbered. All right, so if you do all these things we're talking about, if you replace your furnace and your water heater, which are the big ones, and maybe you replace your stove when the time is right, even your barbecue is a candidate, a charcoal barbecue or a propane barbecue, you can replace that with electric barbecue. You'll be amazed at how much better they operate, how much easier they are to keep clean, no replacing the fuel, all that stuff. You can even get an electric fireplace insert that none of your friends will be able to tell that it's electric. It looks exactly the same, still provides some heat, but none of those nasty fumes and carbon emissions. And of course, all our outdoor power tools, the gas lawnmowers, chainsaws, etc., all those things can be electrified. And when you do those things, you will have no compromise in terms of comfort or performance. In fact, many cases, you will be happy that these things are just easier to use, easier to clean, easier to maintain, etc. And altogether, this adds up to a staggering amount of carbon emission savings possible for a typical home, 5 to 11 tons every year. Every year, think about this, that every year, those carbon emissions are going up in the atmosphere and are just going to stay there for hundreds of years. So the sooner we do these things, the better. I think most people get it that electric vehicles are cleaner, but the thing that I like to talk about that most people don't have a good feeling for is just how much cheaper they are to operate. I love this comparison of these two cars made by Hyundai that are exactly the same. The Hyundai Kona, the gas car, it's a nice little car, a little SUV, gets decent mileage. So for $10 of gasoline at national average prices, you can go about 88 miles. They make an EV version of the exact car. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference except by, looking under the hood, literally. And this car for $10 worth of electricity, you can go 275 miles. So this is why people are excited. The industry realizes that EVs are the future, is because they're so much more energy efficient. And this translates to big savings when you look at the overall cost of ownership of these things. So this is, again, those same cars, and sticker price, you go, wow, the EV is $11,000 more than the gas version. That's crazy. But when you subtract the rebates that are available nationally, and in some cases they're state rebates, I didn't put those in here, but here in Oregon, it's another $2,500 from the state. I didn't put that in here, but you can see it starts to get closer to equal. But the big savings is from the operating costs, where because of those fuel cost savings that we just talked about, and maintenance, these things require virtually no maintenance. Windshield wipers and tires, there's nothing, there's no tune-ups, nothing. So over 5 years, you're going to save somewhere between $1,700 and over $4,000. It's going to depend on whether you have state rebates and how much you drive, et cetera. But typically speaking, you're going to save thousands of dollars per year by owning an EV, just the way they are today. And the EV prices are obviously coming down as battery technology gets more available. I have to talk about this because everyone asks me this about the batteries, and it's true. Creating an EV because of the batteries is more carbon intensive, but look at the life cycle of the complete life cycle of a car. This is a gasoline car. It takes about 7 tons of carbon emissions to make it, but the vast majority of the emissions from that thing are from driving it. So a mid-sized car, this is from the Union of Concerned Scientists, their data, it's going to produce about 70 tons of carbon emissions over its lifetime. An EV, while it is more carbon intensive to manufacture because of the battery, over its life, it's going to produce about less than half of the carbon emissions just with regular old electricity. And of course, if you're charging it with renewable energy, which is most people charge their cars from their homes. So if you've got clean energy, you're going to be zero for all that driving around. So now instead of 70 tons, it's 12. So these things are dramatically better for the environment. And it doesn't matter where you live, by the way, it's always better. I know we've covered a lot, and I'm sure you have questions. We'll get to those. I just want to point out on our website, we have information on how to do every one of these things we've talked about. You can go to the Take Action section of our website and get more information about that, even down to, incentives that are available. And I want to touch on that because the IRA is providing unbelievable incentives now in terms of tax credits. There will be additional incentives coming in terms of rebates for income qualified homes. But right now the rebates, the tax incentives are available. And basically you can see here, there's, depending on your exact situation, it could be up to $2,000 for a heat pump or a heat pump water heater, $7,500, like we mentioned, for an electric vehicle. Of course, there's requirements to meet on these things. So it has to be the right equipment. We have a lot of all that information on our website if you want to dive into that. But the point is there's great incentives available. So that's it from me. Like I mentioned, we try to keep it simple with these steps. We have a newsletter. If you're interested, we're happy to have you sign up for that and get monthly little tips on things you might think about. And we've done webinars on all these topics in detail. If you're thinking about a heat pump water heater and want to learn more about it, for example, you can find a webinar on that on our website. All right.
Thank you, Brian. So informative and so just demonstrative that we can make a difference in our lives by electrifying everything. Got a couple questions in the chat I'm going to go to. The first one probably won't take as long to answer, but Jim Burke has a question about instant-on electric water heaters. How do you feel about those? What are the pitfalls? Yeah. What are they good for, and so on?
Yeah, I think, well, they have the gas tankless water heater has the reputation as being the most efficient. And up until heat pump water heaters, that was true. But heat pump water heaters just blow them away. So I'm not particularly a fan of them. I think and the electric on-demand water heaters, they're slightly better than electric storage water heater. But if you remember that slide, they're still going to be one of the more expensive ways to heat your water. I think the only place where those on-demand things make sense is in, maybe if you've got like a shed that you use the hot water in every once in a while, maybe it's an art studio or something like that, and you barely ever use hot water, but sometimes you need it. That can be great because you're basically never going to use it. But if it's something you're using frequently, I don't advise them. The heat pump water heaters are way better. And they'll save you money in the long term also.
Great. Edward Wall of Somerville, Massachusetts. By the way, I'm looking at where everybody's located. There are people on this call from all parts of the country. It's really, really encouraging. But Edward asked, what are the 3 biggest barriers for a homeowner and especially a renter? Talking about device cost of retrofitting, and so on.
That's a great question. I would say that the barriers that are real are, first of all, there's just knowing what to do that's the why we're having this conversation, because that's the biggest barrier of all. Most people aren't even aware of some of these options that they have. But after that, then it becomes a couple of things. One can be whether there's resources available to you in your area. Like, for example, contractors that know about these devices. That's not always the case. I think in any city, you're going to find contractors who are aware of this. And if you have trouble with the first one you call that doesn't like it or tries to talk you out of it, my advice is say thank you and call somebody else until you find someone who will do it, because there are people out there. In rural areas, that can be harder because there are oftentimes fewer contractors to choose from, et cetera. So that's a barrier, the resources. And then the final one is, of course, the cost, which is the reason why we're so excited about the Inflation Reduction Act. But as Bob mentioned right up front, every device that we're talking about here has a limited lifespan. It's going to fail. So the thing about this information is that if we know in advance what we want to do, we can be prepared, so we're ready to do the right thing. But even better than that is to replace these things before they fail. Because one of the worst of all possible situations is to be, let's say it's winter and your furnace breaks and you know about heat pumps. You're excited about this. You want to get a heat pump. And you call around and the guys say, well, yeah, it's going to be 4 or 5 weeks till I can get there and put one in. So you're going to be freezing for 4 or 5 weeks. You're going to probably but they'll say, but we can get you a gas furnace tomorrow. That's what they'll say, because this is true. They may have one of them sitting in their warehouse. And so you find yourself in this terrible position where you want to put in a heat pump. You know it's the right thing to do, but you have to replace your gas furnace with another gas furnace because you can't be in a freezing home. So that's why I think one of these barriers is that difficulty of instant replacement thing can also be a barrier. So the more we know about this and anticipate it ahead of time, the better. I'd say the last barrier that's worth knowing about is, in some cases, you're going to have some electrical kind of wiring projects that come along for the ride with these things, because like a gas water heater, for example, if you replace that, you're going to need a 240 volt circuit run to where your water heater goes. Probably not one there already. So that's another reason why thinking ahead is really a good thing, because you can make your house ready to go. And then when it's time to swap those things out, you've done it already.
Great. Sherry Stark asked an interesting question. Can you use a heat pump for heating water and heating air in the home?
That's a great question. There are a few kind of emerging solutions there. Harvest Thermal is one. I'm sure, Bob, you're familiar with them. They're a California startup, and they're getting a lot of attention. And they've developed a heat pump that will do that. Will heat the water for your storage water tank and also heat and cool your home. I would say that's still kind of a fringe product. I'm excited about it.
I would agree.
But it's just, I can't recommend it because most of you wouldn't even have it available to you. And if it was available to you, you would be like a beta tester, in your area. So if that's exciting to you, I can call me and I'll tell you how to make that happen. But for most people, that's just not an option. I do think in the future, it could very well be, but for the time being, I wouldn't say that's a mainstream solution. Whereas all these other ones we've been talking about, these are mainstream solutions. They've got long warranties, they're reliable, they're tested. You're not going to have problems with them.
Great. Let's see. Questions about the IRA. When is it going to hit the streets? How do we find the right contractors when the money becomes available?
Yeah.
What's the strategy about what to do first? All those kind of things kind of dovetail together.
Great. Well, in terms of a strategy of what to do first, I have if you go to our website, I have, and I can, if you're interested, I can send this out to people, but I have a document that I said how to get started, which is basically kind of trying to think about like what I should do first. And there's no right answer to what you should do first. I think a lot of it can come down to, take stock of the equipment that you've got. If you've got something that's on the end of its useful life, I'd say start there. But if you don't, and you still want to do something, then ask yourself what's most important to you. If indoor air quality is most important to you, then start with the induction stove, because that's going to make a huge difference. If you like to cook, I would say start there too, because you'll be using that every day. Whereas your furnace or your water heater, you won't really notice that once they're in, but an induction stove, you will appreciate it every time you cook something. So I'd say that could be a reason to start there, even though that's not a huge source of carbon emissions. It will make a dramatic improvement to your life. If you want to save money, probably the water heater is a good one to do, because it's definitely save you some operating money, and it's it's relatively low cost. You're talking about a couple $1,000s versus a heat pump, which could be over 10. So those are things to think about. There's no right answer there. In terms of the IRA, the tax credits are available this calendar year. So anything you do, as long as you put in qualified equipment, and all the information on that's on our website, you will get a tax credit this year. But it's important that you make sure when you're talking, like if you're putting in a heat pump system, let's just say, that's probably the one that's the most dramatic or more complicated. You have to make sure that the system qualifies, and your installer should know that. But if not, I've got information on our site about how to find that. And there's things to know about, one of the things about IRA, for example, is that this is a piece of legislation that has no finish line, essentially. So you can maximize your credits this year, because they top out at $3,500, depending on combinations of things you might do. And then next year, go back and top it out again. So for example, you could do your heat pump water heater this year, maximize your credits, go back next year, put in a heat pump, etc. The rebates that I mentioned that are income qualified. So some of you may qualify for these rebate programs. The details on that are not known yet. We probably won't know till the end of this year.
We're going to keep going with questions, but before we do that, I want to make sure to remind everybody that thank you for committing to long-term significant lifestyle changes by electrifying everything. This is the one most direct impact each of us can have on the climate change, by reducing all those sources of carbon dioxide that Brian talked about. Secondly, I would say that looking at this questions, I think a lot of benefit would come from reaching back out to all of you and giving you some updated information. Brian mentioned a flyer that he's done. I think you've already been sent that. If you look in what somebody sent out yesterday, you'll see how to get started. He has another one about what are the right questions to ask contractors. And then also, how much money, I'll have you answer this one, Brian. How much money will there be available from the Inflation Reduction Act?
Well, the total number is not capped for these tax incentives. So if you're talking about it in aggregate, it's billions of dollars. But from a personal level, if we go back to this slide here, just for a second, let me share my screen one more time here. This slide here is probably the best way to see it, if I can get it to show here, sorry. But you can see that it depends on the device, but there's money for electric panel upgrades, for example, or electrical wiring. about $600. An air conditioner or heat pump, 2,000, heat pump water heater, 2,000. Rooftop solar, you can get 30% of the cost for installing it, which is a lot. That is a credit that was available years ago and has expired, and now they're bringing it back. You can do weatherization for up to 1,200. So this can be windows, doors, insulation, etc. Battery storage is the same as rooftop solar, 30% of the project. And those ones are not capped in terms of the cap is the 30%. But for these devices that are here, the cap are these numbers. So basically what this does for a heat pump, let's just say, is it lets you get a top of the line heat pump for about the same cost that it would have costed you to get a good furnace. So what it does is it sort of levelizes the cost of this really good equipment with more mediocre products. And so you will save money in the long term because the operating costs will be lower and you'll be getting really good equipment. But there are some complexities here, and all of the information about that is on our website. If you Google that, if you go back to this incentives page on our website.
Brian, you had a question about the Rewiring America calculator and how to get to it. I put a note in the chat about how to find it. Just Google calculator Rewiring America. It'll come up. Or do you have a URL?
The link is in our website also. If you go to electrifynow.net, and here, actually, I can get you the exact link here. Hold on a second. Let me just do that.
Just so everybody knows, we're going to stay on, and you can ask questions from the floor and stay on. I think we'll probably stay on for another 15, 20 minutes. I know some of you may have to go. You will receive a follow-up email with information, and we are serious about the offer to reach out to help form local groups. And Brian just put that in the chat. So from the floor, you know how to raise your hand just like that, or you can use it. Okay, Dan, you have a question?
I'm unmuted. Yeah, I just put the Rewiring America calculators URL in the chat.
Have you used it?
And if anybody else did or not, but was able to get there. And one of the things that is in the pledge that you wanted, I guess, were to have us do presentations to people to try, get people to take this up. An organization I'm working with is, in fact, doing that. Its local chapter and many of its chapters, it's called Citizens Climate Lobby. I would guess most of you have heard of it. But what our chapter in Atlanta is doing, and quite a number of others across the country, though not all of them, are going to be talking to groups, to clubs, to church congregations, to whatever, wherever we find a willing audience, let them know about, what we've heard about here and what they can do about it. We're aiming mostly at lower income people because, for one thing, energy eats up, utility bills eat up a large portion of their budget, more so than it is for middle class people. And also these rebates, when they become available, and they're still working out the details at the national level, and then they'll maybe late in the year they'll come to the various states, where the states will have to work out how this is going to function. But we haven't started presenting yet. We're lining up some groups, and we will, but it's going to take, we have some time, because we're assuming that the groups we're going to be speaking to, very few could use a tax credit.
That's true.
What they're going to do, and what's part of this law is the rebates. That is a certain amount of money that people get for buying, a particular kind of heat pump piece of equipment or whatever, the the rebate is which you can also find on the Rewiring America calculator, has a table with those. But the rebate is really almost more of a pre-bate. That is, once the procedures are worked out, people who qualify for it will be able to arrange the purchase and delivery and installation without paying anything up front if they qualify, if the rebate qualifies them for the entire amount. And then I don't know how, if it doesn't qualify them for the entire amount, they'll probably have to pay up front. I don't know. This is part of what's being worked out. Brian, you probably know more about the details of how Department of Energy is working out its and the IRS are working all this out, and then
yeah, I mean the rebate programs will be they're all implemented through the state, so it'll be different in every state, and I think those numbers are good guidance numbers, but it's that's a limited pool of money, unlike the tax incentives, which is unlimited.
Right.
So I'm excited about it, but I just feel like it's hard to talk about because it's going to be different in every state.
And we don't know what to promise. That's why we're not rushing out and doing presentations now, because
that's good.
Wait a long time before, maybe a year before somebody could actually have something.
The way my wife and I approached this is we didn't have all the answers. We didn't know everything, but we did get ready when the time came, things would happen. And I think that's what you could do too, Dan, in Atlanta, is get ready. One thing you can do is start being friends with electricians, because electricians are going to be, especially the licensed ones or union shops, are going to be the ones who are going to get most of this work, and they're going to be busy. So the more you can reach out and make friends, and maybe bring one in to change a light socket or something, just to get to know them. That's what we did. A guy by the name of Mike Delfino, San Mateo Electric. We had him do little stuff. We used him over the years. And when the time came, he was available. Other questions from the floor?
I'm just seeing this question from Richard about my brother's cell carrier and Bryant air conditioners wholesale. It's interesting. And I think it's pretty common that people in that industry, are maybe purple at best in terms of the political leanings. And so they might not be that, I don't know, motivated by the carbon emissions conversation that we've been having. But I can tell you that they are very motivated by the business that they do. And I was at these dealer meetings for Carrier and Bryant here in the Northwest, for the ones that were in Spokane, which was kind of Montana and Idaho, so probably a lot of similar kind of people that you might be talking about. And they get it that electrification is the future. And so the people who are thinking about building their business in general are embracing heat pumps, and those who are maybe towards the ends of their careers, maybe some of them just want to wrap things up with stuff they're familiar with, like banging in gas furnaces. But I think the business climate in that area is kind of shifting towards embracing of heat pumps. It's going to be unequal, unevenly distributed, in terms of who does that. But I found that, in this room full of 100 people, for example, there's probably 30 of them who are really excited about heat pumps, and they're gearing their business up to do that. There's another 30 they'll sell you whatever you want. If you want a heat pump, they'll sell it to you. If they want you a gas furnace, they'll sell it to you. And there's another 30 that would just rather do furnaces. So that's kind of the way it is at the moment, but it's rapidly changing. And the manufacturer themselves, the carrier, the brand, I can tell you, and the distributor, everything they're talking about, all the awards they're giving to their dealers are for heat pumps.
Great answer. You have a couple hands up. First, Edward Lowell, and then Sherry Stark.
Hi, thanks very much. Do you go by Bob or Robert?
Just don't call me late for dinner.
Okay. I'm from Massachusetts, and we are living in a 6-unit co-op. And the problem we have is we have a 4.5 amp transformer on the street that serves all 6 units plus the common garage and the elevator. We can't get an upgrade in service to be able to go ahead and get the electrification service we need. So also we're a state that has anywhere from 50 to 60% of our energy supplied by gas, and tremendous invested stakeholder interest there. But any advice of how to deal with that? And we aren't alone. There are a lot of multifamily dwellings of 5 units or more around Boston, and they will suffer the same problems. Any advice on that? We're working legislatively with the new governor here.
Well,
She's
give an
terrific.
answer. I'll give an answer, and then Brian probably knows a little bit more than I do. I'm still trying to get PG&E to remove my gas meter. The gas meter I haven't used for a year. They're stalling, delaying. We're seeing a lot of this. I just keep at them. You know, now I'm emailing them every single week. When are you going to give me the permits so I can take out my gas meter? And on and on and on. Brian, do you have a better answer than that?
Well, I think that, you know, multifamily is a little bit more complex than single family residence because there's more going on there. But I would say that oftentimes there's a lot you can do around electrification without increasing your service. There's a lot of interest in the state of California around this in particular, because what they realize is that if every home that has gas in it upgraded their service from 100 amps to 200 amps or something like that, the knock-on effects of that in terms of the grid system are really expensive. So there's been a lot of focus on how you can electrify a home with a 100 amp panel, 100 amp service. And it's very possible to do. So I would say there can oftentimes be this knee-jerk reaction that when you electrify a home, you need larger electrical service. It's not always the case. So some of it might be finding an electrician and a contractor to work with who's savvy on that stuff. I might be able to help you there. I don't know, but that's one thing. And then the other thing is that if it's true that you need more service, and for electric vehicle charging, for example, you undoubtedly would be, yeah, that's something that the utilities they have to do it. And they're obliged to do it. So, I mean, you may be obliged to pay the cost, but they're obliged to do it. As far as
we're fighting tooth and nail. We have an engineer. We do need an upgrade of service. And we have a system where the same utility owns the gas and the electric. And so they are slow walking the removal from the gas because they want to eke the last dollar out of it. And the electric utility has a problem of spending money to provide the transformers necessary and locating them. So it's a real dilemma here.
Yeah, no, it's an issue. Yeah, for sure.
Sherry, you've been waiting patiently.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask if you could talk a little bit more about the mini split that you said for smaller homes. And I also wanted to ask if you know long-term you're going to be getting a lot of these changes, do they offer any rebates in upgrading your electrical system?
Well, there is money in the IRA for electrical panel upgrade, $600, which is not a lot, to be honest. If you really are doing an electrical panel upgrade, it could cost you a couple $1,000s. That's why what I'm finding is most of the time you don't actually need to do that. There's very few situations where that's actually required, but that is the knee-jerk reaction that a lot of electricians will tell you. But there are things you might want to think about doing in general. You know, one of the ways to save money on this whole effort is to do the electrical stuff together when you can, because, you know, obviously it's cheaper if you can get the electrician to come there and do several things rather than just one thing. But I don't know if I'm answering your question exactly, but you were asking about mini splits too. They're amazing. They're the most efficient way to heat your home because you don't lose any heat through ducts, which is one of the typical problems, particularly with older homes. I don't know. Did I answer your question?
My husband just added how much does it cost a lot more a month to get that mini split or the electrical bill?
Well, your electric bill would go up slightly and your gas bill would go down a lot. That's what would happen. But in general, you would spend less money. I mean, I can't promise, I don't know your exact situation in Los Angeles. It might not be so good because I think electricity is more expensive there. But the numbers I was showing are the national averages. Most people will save money, but I think California, I'm not so sure. Bob would probably have a better answer than that because he's more familiar with the relative cost of gas and electricity in California.
Sure, we have a 4-ton Mitsubishi heat pump for heating and cooling. The only drawback, we didn't have to change the ducts, but it's on a lot of the time. The mini splits aren't on as often. You can isolate rooms and heat and cool only the rooms you need. So that's a tremendous advantage of having the mini splits, especially in California and other places. Jim Burke. You're welcome. Jim Burke, you had a
Well, thank you for doing this today. I really enjoy it. And thank you, Brian, for doing this. So I want to, does instant electric hot water ever make sense? And the reason I'm asking that question is I have a situation where I'm in a dilemma whether to replace with I have a tankless gas right now. And so the space is limited, but we don't use hot water there very often at all. And so, I have a 30 kW solar system, so I produce more electricity than I'll ever use. I'm a real special case. So I'm really thinking about putting a tankless electric in there because I make enough solar to already cover that, and I'm storing hot water in any reason. I may use hot water in there once a week or once every 2 weeks. So.
Well, in that case, it might make sense. Yeah, I think in your case, it might make sense. The one thing that is a little bit of an issue sometimes with the tankless electric ones is they suck, when they do turn on, they suck a lot of electricity. So you need a lot of fat wires to them, essentially. Right. It's going to take up a lot of space on your circuit breaker box. But
I have a 360 service coming in.
Yeah, you're probably fine.
You're right. And I have a 240 going over there already that I pulled a dryer out, and so they're right where it go. I have a 240 circuit going there already.
Yeah, you typically need two 240s.
Well, I was looking at, there's some new ones from Germany. You don't need the most you'd ever do is one shower for one person.
Okay, well then, yeah, you use one of the smaller ones. It's a single 240 with a big fat wire though. So that's the one thing is I don't know if the wire is big enough.
Well, it was a dryer. It was a wire.
Those are the details. Those are the details.
Wire for a dryer. It was a dryer wire.
So yeah, might be all right. Might be all right. I mean, that might be a good situation for it. Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. Space constraints. And if you don't use it a lot, then yes. But if you for a typical home where you're using hot water all the time,
yeah,
I wouldn't advise them. But in your case, it might make sense. Yeah.
Good. I just wanted to get a sense of what your thoughts are.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I have a question, Brian. A lot of the people that are on this call have already taken the pledge to Electrify or just taken the pledge in general. How would somebody go about deciding what's the best way to take the pledge to Electrify? You said it sometimes depends. Do you have any other thoughts about how you might decide to take the pledge to Electrify?
Well, I think taking the pledge is great because you're not committing yourself to do anything specifically. You're just saying, I'm planning to do this. I want to do it. So I love it because it sort of signals intent. And when it comes down to what to do first, I'd say a good place to start is, there's a lot of HVAC companies that offer these home energy audits, where they come and sort of look at your home and give you advice on what they would do. And the ones that offer if it's a company that offers heat pump water heaters and maybe even solar panels, some of them do that too. Those are great companies to work with because they're going to be thinking about your whole home and not just the HVAC. So if you can find someone like that by Googling around in your area who does these home energy audits, I highly advise that. Usually they might cost you a couple $100 maybe. There are tax incentives that will cover that, but you'll get a good idea about what makes sense to do. Maybe they'll give you some information about what order would make sense. And sometimes they can actually tell you how you could save money on doing it and roughly how much it would cost. So it'll give you a really good idea about what's out there. But then, in terms of choosing the order of things, it's really kind of, I kind of say, like, what do you care most about? And that's a good way to start. Unless you've got something that's ready to fail, in which case that's where you should start.
Great. We have time for one or two more questions. Anybody else have a burning question about electricity or deciding to change your lifestyle with how you heat and cool your home and cook and light? Well, thank you all. I guess I counted to 10. I hope that worked. Thank you.
Yeah,
all.
and I'm gonna put my email in the chat here. If anyone has questions and they want to get some advice about their home or whatever, email me, please, and I will try to help you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Brian, for taking the time. You're so generous with your thoughts and ideas and the way this works. We do encourage everybody to take the pledge to electrify. And Pam, I think I'll give you the final words.
Well, thank you, Robert. That was really wonderful and really, really good. I don't understand a lot of it, but I know because of my husband, we're all electric, which is great, thanks to him. But it's really important. One of the things in creating the Take the Pledge campaign, which is around reducing consumerism in 4 areas, and also different things that you're passionate about, such as electrify everything. And it's together we can make a difference. But if we don't start taking action on all of these things, on all the products we buy, all the water we use, all the consumption, the electricity, the energy, etc. And we're sending a lot of information, informative information, that if you know a lot, but you know people who don't know a lot and want to have a conversation with about it, the Take the Pledge campaign through Elders Action Network would really be helpful for you, and you could refer people. We would especially like you to tell others about it too, if you're already doing it and finding value. So thank you. Thanks, guys.
Well, thank you all for attending. It's a good way to spend a Friday afternoon. And again, Brian, thank you so much. As I said, you are so generous with your time. And thank you, Pam, for creating the Take the Pledge campaign.
My pleasure. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and good luck with your electrification projects.